Hungry Ghosts. Giving helpful advice to non-physical beings from many diverse realms of existence was a serious responsibility that Acariya Mun continued to fulfill right up to the time of his death. He was in constant communication with such beings wherever he lived, but more so in the mountain regions. There, in remote wilderness areas far from human habitation, one group or another visited with him almost every night. Even hungry ghosts, awaiting offerings of merit dedicated to them by their living relatives, came to seek his assistance. It was impossible to tell how long they had been dead, what family or nationality they had once belonged to, or even whether or not those ghosts had any living relatives left at all. In contacting Acariya Mun, they hoped that, out of compassion, he would assist them by finding their living relatives and telling them to make donations, dedicating a portion of the merit to the dead to help lessen their torment and suffering and make their lives more bearable. Many of them had already suffered unspeakable miseries in hell for such a long time that it was impossible to calculate the length of their stay in terms of human existence. When they were finally able to rise clear of the hell realms, they still could not evade such misfortune sufficiently to experience some measure of comfort. Instead, their suffering continued unabated. For beings who are stuck with the consequences of their evil Dhamma, it matters little which state of existence they are born into, since very little changes to help alleviate their suffering. Hungry ghosts used to tell Acariya Mun they had no idea how long it would take them to work their way through the consequences of their evil deeds. They clung to one desperate hope. If he could kindly inform living relatives of their plight, those relatives might be willing to share the merit of their good deeds with them, allowing them to escape from such unbearable torment. When he questioned the hungry ghosts about their relatives, they talked about another world altogether, one that was incomprehensible to him. Having died and been reborn in one of the realms of hell, some had remained there for tens or even hundreds of thousands of years in non-physical existence before being released into another lesser state where they had to work through the remainder of their evil Dhamma. Their ghost-like existence then lasted another 500 to 1,000 non-physical years, so it was quite impossible to trace their family lineage. Such was the cruel irony of their karmic dilemma. By the time that the most severe consequences of their Dhamma were exhausted and only the lesser aspects remained, a state where they could finally receive assistance from their relatives, they had lost all track of their families. So they had no choice but to suffer that karmic misery indefinitely, without any idea when it would end. Such ghosts resembled stray animals who have no owners to care for them. Other hungry ghosts could be helped somewhat, for they died only recently and their Dhamma was not so severe, meaning that they were in a position to receive merit dedicated to them by their relatives. Since they had living relatives whose names and addresses they could recall, Acariya Mun was able to give them some assistance as long as their families lived in the vicinity where he was residing. Once he knew who they were, he looked for an opportunity to speak with them. He advised them to dedicate to their dead relatives, who awaited the merit they made by performing special religious functions, or more commonly, by daily offerings of food to the monks. Some ghosts were able to receive a portion of the merit made by generous people everywhere, even though it was not specifically dedicated to them. Therefore, Acariya Mun always made such dedications while extending loving kindness to all living beings. According to the specific nature of their Dhamma, some ghosts can receive merit dedicated by anyone, while others can receive only the merit that is personally dedicated to them by their relatives. Acariya Mun said that ghosts live a very peculiar type of existence. From his extensive experience with them, he always found ghosts far more bothersome than any other class of non-physical beings. Having no recourse to merit of their own, ghosts depend on and always feel indebted to others for their survival. Should these others fail them, the ghosts are left completely destitute. Their dependence on others puts them in the extremely difficult position of never being able to stand on their own. Generosity and other forms of merit-making are vitally important as the key elements for laying a foundation of individual self-reliance in this and all future lives. All living beings are the product of their Dhamma. They themselves must take full responsibility for the consequences they encounter. No one else can accept that responsibility because no one can experience the Dhamma generated by another. Births, both good and bad, and the relative degrees of comfort and pain one experiences therein, are the sole responsibility of the individual who created the circumstances that produced these outcomes. No being can substitute for another in this regard. Even those who expect no benefit from their actions still receive the karmic credit for them. Acariya Mun was an expert in matters concerning ghosts, devas, brahmas, yakshas, nagas, and garudas. Although he did not always reveal the extent of his knowledge, he had the ability to explore endless varieties of phenomena within the many gross and refined non-physical states of existence that lie beyond the range of human perception. His stories about ghosts were quite hair-raising. Even those without fear of ghosts couldn't help but feel trepidation about the mysterious powers of Dhamma. He said that if only people could see their own and other people's good and bad Dhamma in the way they see substantive things, like water and fire, no one would dare do evil any more than they would dare walk into a blazing fire. Instead, they would be eager to do only good, which has the cool, refreshing quality of water. Trouble would gradually diminish in the world as each person worked to guard himself against the dangers of evil. Once, when Acariya Mun was explaining about heaven, hell, and the ghost realms to the monks, one of his senior disciples spoke up. Since people cannot actually see heaven and hell, or the various non-physical beings like ghosts, devas, garudas, and nagas, they can't fully understand the ultimate consequences of their actions. But you can see all those things, so wouldn't it be a good idea for you to elucidate them for the benefit of people everywhere? All are natural phenomena which were clearly understood by the Lord Buddha and his Arahant disciples. No one has ever faulted the Buddha and his disciples for teaching people about them, so I don't see why anyone should object to your doing so. People are likely to show the same appreciation for your amazing talents as we, your disciples, do. Acariya Mun was adamant in his response. The kind of craziness that you suggest will destroy us both. I have never considered speaking out publicly about this matter. Should I do so, you and I and the rest of the monks sitting here would end up being a bunch of lunatics. And once the whole monastery has gone mad, what kind of monastic asylum do you think would accept us all? The sasana was proclaimed and taught with discretion, to be practiced, understood, and spoken about with discretion. This nonsense you suggest, is it really a matter of discretion, or is it something foolhardy? Think about it. In my opinion, the very thought of it is crazy, let alone actually suggesting it. Even though people might survive listening to us talk about it, we ourselves would surely be doomed. So why bring it up? If you consider the tangible, visible things all around us, people everywhere are quite capable of dealing with them in an appropriate, reasonable manner. Although Dhamma is the supreme truth, it still counts on the involvement of people in the world, so we should always work to harmonize the proprieties of society with the truth of Dhamma. The Buddha was the first to clearly know and understand the true nature of all phenomena. He spoke about them with absolute assurance, but he was always impeccably discreet in the way he handled these issues. Speaking publicly about any of them, he invariably took the specific circumstances and the people he was addressing into consideration. He spoke then only with the utmost discernment and discretion. Knowledge and understanding about the diverse nature of non-physical phenomena is a prerogative of the one who has attained that kind of perception, but talking away indiscriminately about such knowledge is quite abnormal, so normal people are reluctant to listen. This is not intended to be a criticism of anyone. Rather, what's important to keep in mind here is that those who do possess such knowledge should act properly according to the principles of Dhamma, for their own benefit and for the benefit of everyone associating with them. Being convinced of the amazing nature of what we have perceived is not sufficient reason to speak out about things which may encourage others to go mad. Those people who are keen on listening to such talk simply because their religious conviction is dependent on hearing about amazing phenomena are already on the road to madness, so I don't approve of conviction and amazement of this kind. I'd prefer that the kind of discernment the Lord Buddha taught us be used by people in their convictions and in their sense of amazement. Even though we aren't all exceptionally wise, at least there's hope that enough good judgment will be shown to maintain the sasana, preserving it for the future. Let me ask you this. Suppose you had a certain amount of money, which could be useful to you if you were clever, but harmful to you if you weren't. How would you handle it when going into a crowd of people to ensure that both you and your money were safe? The senior disciple replied, I take every reasonable precaution to look after my money. How exactly would you go about looking after it in a large crowd of people to avoid any possible danger? If I felt it was appropriate to spend some of my money there, I'd take care to count out and hand over the necessary amount without allowing anyone to see the larger amount that I still had with me. That amount I'd keep well hidden from view to avoid any possible danger. Acariya then said, Okay, now, let's suppose that you possess a certain knowledge and understanding about ghosts and other non-physical beings. How would you handle that knowledge discreetly in relation to others so that it would be of some benefit to them without becoming an issue of widespread public notoriety, which could be harmful to both you and the sasana? I'd have to use the same kind of care in handling such knowledge that I'd use in handling my money. Just a moment ago, you implied that I should broadcast my knowledge about such phenomena to the general public without ever considering the consequences. Why was that? I figure that the average discriminating person would never suggest what you just did, and yet you spoke right up. If you don't even have the common sense of the average person, what will anyone find to admire in you? I fail to see anything at all admirable in your thinking. Should someone reproach you for lacking judgment, how would you defend yourself when confronted with the truth of this accusation? Think about it. Which are the greater in this world, the wise or the foolish? And how would anyone be able to reasonably maintain the sasana and preserve its continued welfare by following the suggestion you made to me just now? His disciple replied, Thinking about it now, I feel that what I suggested was totally wrong. I spoke up because hearing about such amazing things has so inspired me that I wanted to share this knowledge with people everywhere. I assumed they would probably be inspired as well and so benefit enormously from it. But I never considered the obvious adverse consequences that such a disclosure would have for the whole sasana. Please be kind enough to forgive me. I don't want to see this tendency to be indiscreet become ingrained in my character. I shall try to be more circumspect in the future, so that it doesn't happen again. If someone reproaches me for lacking judgment, I will gladly admit my mistake, for I clearly deserve the criticism. Until you asked me just now, I had never really considered whether or not the fools outnumber the wise. Now I realize that there must be many more fools in this world, since in our village communities there are very few wise people who care about moral issues. Mostly people don't seem to know what they're here for and where they're going. They aren't very interested in thinking about why they do things, and whether they do right or wrong, good or bad. Being satisfied with whatever is easy and convenient at the moment, they simply let fate decide their future. I understand all this a lot better now. The people who are capable of reasonably maintaining the sasana and preserving its continued welfare must be wise and discerning people who lead others in an even, harmonious manner, so that everyone can benefit from their example. A wise, discerning teacher is the cornerstone of success, in the same way that a capable leader is essential to all affairs in all walks of life. Acariya took up the discussion at this point. Since you're capable of understanding that a wise person is essential to the success of every endeavor, why don't you think about what's important in your own endeavors as a practicing monk? Spiritual endeavors, being very subtle, are difficult to fully understand. For this reason, only clever, discerning people can uphold the sasana to perfection. Here, I'm not referring to the kind of cleverness that causes destruction in the world and damage to the sasana, but cleverness that discriminates wisely, making decisions favorable to one's material and spiritual prosperity. It's this type of cleverness that's implicit in the first two factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, Samma Dirte and Samma Sangappo, right view and right thought. and these factors are personified by someone whose words and actions always follow the principles of wisdom. Even right samadhi is dependent on the analytical, probing wisdom of right view to avoid becoming comatose samadhi. When the citta converges into a state of calm, wisdom should always be there, playing a supportive role. Otherwise, how could those dedicated to understanding the true nature of all phenomena deal correctly with the knowledge arising within the citta, or the external phenomena with which it comes into contact? If wisdom is not there to help, one is bound to make mistakes in judgment. The diversity of internal and external phenomena that can become involved with samadhi is limitless, the perception of them being limited only by each individual's natural inclinations. Those so inclined will naturally perceive such phenomena, and nothing can prevent them from doing so. But the key factor here is wisdom. Wisdom analyzes arising phenomena and then chooses the ones that are suitable to focus on, so that the rest can be allowed to pass by without causing trouble. Those lacking wisdom will even have a hard time successfully getting through the samadhi practice. They will find themselves being pleased with this perception or displeased with that one, ecstatic about this, despondent about that. All are emotional reactions impinging on the heart, causing it to become attached. Unless wisdom is present to effectively deal with them, such disturbing emotional attachments can never be eliminated. Wisdom can be selective, ignoring what is superfluous to focus on what is essential, thus indicating the direction in which one's practice should proceed. Our purpose in being ordained as Buddhist monks is to search for knowledge and wisdom, so that we can develop those virtuous qualities admired by people everywhere. We aren't here to parade our ineptitude in front of the kilesas by succumbing to their devious tricks, but rather to develop clever tactics of our own to outmaneuver the kilesas, thus countering their tricks. Living without an adequate means of protection, we leave ourselves in a very precarious position. The principles of Dhamma and the monastic discipline are a monk's protective armor, while mindfulness and wisdom are his preferred weapons. If we want to remain steady in our practice and be constant in all situations, we must maintain mindfulness and wisdom in all our daily activities. Mindfulness and wisdom must permeate all that we think, say, and do, without exception. Only then can we be certain of our mode of practice. I'd really like to see all my students display uncompromising diligence in their efforts to transcend dukkha, using mindfulness and wisdom to oversee this work. You will thus make yourselves worthy recipients of the Buddha's outstanding teaching, which stresses the importance of using skillful means in all circumstances. I have no desire to see my students floundering foolishly in a state of confusion about emotional attachments, because complacency and laziness keep them from doing the work necessary to carry them beyond these dangers. So don't be indifferent to the work at hand. A practicing monk who is striving to cross beyond the world of samsara is engaged in the noblest form of endeavor. No other kind of work is more demanding than the task of lifting the heart beyond the pain and suffering experienced in samsara. It requires unstinting effort on all fronts, including a willingness to sacrifice your life. Entrust your life to your own diligent efforts as they attempt to pull you from the abyss of the kilesas. Unlike other types of work, there is no room for ambiguity here. If you want to realize the wondrous results that you have yet to experience, you must persist in putting your life on the line for the sake of Dhamma. No other method can be expected to achieve the right result. You must be willing to give your life to transcend the world of samsara. Only then will you be free of the burden of dukkha in future births. I myself never expected to survive and become a teacher, for my determination to transcend samsara was much stronger than my concern for staying alive. All my efforts in all circumstances were directed toward a goal beyond life. I never allowed regrets about losing my life to distract me from my purpose. The desire to maintain my course on the path to liberation kept me under constant pressure and directed my every move. I resolved that if my body could not withstand the pressure, I would just have to die. I had already died so many countless times in the past that I was fed up with dying already. But were I to live, I desired only to realize the same Dhamma that the Buddha had attained. I had no wish to achieve anything else, for I had had enough of every other type of accomplishment. At that time, my overriding desire was to avoid rebirth and being trapped once more in the cycle of birth and death. The effort that I put forth to attain Dhamma can be compared to a turbine rotating non-stop, or to a wheel of Dhamma whirling ceaselessly day and night as it cut its way through every last vestige of the kilesas. Only at sleep did I allow myself a temporary respite from this rigorous practice. As soon as I woke up, I was back at work, using mindfulness, wisdom, faith, and diligence to root out and destroy those persistent kilesas that still remained. I persevered in that pitched battle with the kilesas until mindfulness, wisdom, faith, and diligence had utterly destroyed them all. Only then could I finally relax. From that moment on, I knew for certain that the kilesas had been vanquished. Categorically, never to return and cause trouble again. But the body, not having disintegrated along with the kilesas, remained alive. This is something you should all think about carefully. Do you want to advance fearlessly in the face of death and strive diligently to leave behind the misery that's been such a painful burden on your hearts for so long? Or do you want to persist in your regrets about having to die, and so be reborn into this miserable condition again? Hurry up and think about it. Don't allow yourselves to become trapped by dukkha wasting this opportunity. You'll regret it for a long time to come. The battlefield for conquering the kilesas exists within each individual who practices with wisdom, faith, and perseverance as weapons for fighting his way to freedom. It is very counterproductive to believe that you have plenty of time left, since you're still young and in good health. Practicing monks should decisively reject such thinking. It is the heart alone that engenders all misjudgment and all wisdom, so you should not focus your attention outside of yourself. Since they are constantly active, pay close attention to your actions, speech, and thoughts to determine the kind of results they produce. Are they producing Dhamma, which is an antidote to the poisons of apathy and self-indulgence, or are they producing a tonic that nourishes the delusions that cause dukkha, giving them strength to extend the cycle of existence indefinitely? Whatever they are, the results of your actions, speech, and thoughts should be thoroughly examined in every detail, or else you'll encounter nothing but failure and never rise above the pain and misery that haunt this world. Acariya Mun's response to the monk, who suggested that he teach people indiscriminately about the unusual phenomena he experienced, was fierce and uncompromising. The gist of his reply makes for a remarkable Dhamma teaching, one that is seldom heard. It seems unlikely that the monk deserved a condemnation as strong as Acariya Mun's stirring rebuke might have suggested. Perhaps speaking up was his way of prompting Acariya Mun into giving us a talk. As far as I could tell, if nothing out of the ordinary happened to strike his heart and provoke a response, Acariya Mun preferred to speak in a smooth, easy manner, especially when the subject was very profound. At such times, however, his listeners often felt something missing, and were not fully satisfied with his teaching. But if someone started something by asking him a question, or if he became annoyed hearing some monks talk ambiguously about Dhamma, or if their discussion piqued his interest, then the Dhamma in his heart began to stir and stream forth, expressing itself in unusual ways that lent fire and excitement to our listening. Each time Acariya Mun delivered a declamation of this kind, his audience felt deeply moved in a way that's difficult to describe. I myself, having a rather rough temperament, always preferred listening to his fiery exhortations, since they fit so well with my natural disposition. For this reason, I reckon that those monks who employed various means to provoke Acariya Mun into fiery talks were in fact using their ingenuity to come up with clever provocations. Since they probably intended to benefit from his response, they were not entirely in the wrong. The resolute Dhamma expositions that inspired me the most invariably occurred when I asked him probing, prodding questions. His explanations then were bound to be directed personally at me, unlike the general explanations meant for all the monks. Once I had lived with him for some time, I came to know many different ways of eliciting his comments, without waiting for him to bring these matters up himself in a general monastic meeting. Once, Acariya Mun and 3 or 4 monks were living in a secluded cave in Changdao district. After passing 3 nights there, Acariya Mun told the monks that, in his meditation, he had seen a spacious, inviting cave situated high up a steep mountain slope in the area nearby. He told them that many Patseka Buddhas had resided there in the past, but that nowadays monks couldn't live there. The ascent was too steep and the location too high for finding a place within walking distance where they could obtain alms food. He told the monks to climb up the mountain to look at the cave, and insisted they take a supply of food with them. Since there was no path leading up to the mountain, they would have to climb as best they could until they reached the summit. The cave was situated a short distance from the very top. Taking several lay people along, the monks made the climb to the summit, where they found a beautiful, spacious cave, exactly as Acariya Mun had predicted. The air was clear, and the ambiance pleasant and inviting. The monks were so pleased with their discovery that they didn't want to leave. They would have preferred to remain there indefinitely, practicing meditation. Unfortunately, the cave was so high up and so far from the nearest village that they had no place to go for alms round. When the food they brought was nearly exhausted, they had to come back down to the cave where Acariya Mun resided. Upon their return, he asked them about their impressions. "Well, how was the cave? Nice and inviting?" Seeing an image of it in my meditation, I felt it was so beautiful and spacious that I wanted you all to go up and take a look. I was sure you'd like it. When we first arrived, I didn't think to examine this mountain to see what's here. When investigating it a few days later, I discovered how many strange, amazing things it contains. That cave you went to is constantly protected by terrestrial devas. Anyone acting improperly there can expect to feel the consequences. When I sent you up there, I forgot to mention that the cave is protected by devas, and to warn you to restrain yourselves and behave properly the whole time. I didn't want you to be loud and noisy, which is unacceptable behavior for a monk. I was afraid that if the devas protecting the cave were displeased, they might cause you discomfort by precipitating something unpleasant. The monks informed Acariya Mun that they preferred to spend a longer time in the cave, but he insisted that, no matter how attractive the place was, it would not be possible to live there because no food was available. Acariya Mun spoke of the cave in a very matter-of-fact way, as though he had actually seen it many times. Of course, he had never gone up there, the climb being too steep and difficult. Nonetheless, he spoke about it with the assurance of someone who knew for certain that the knowledge arising in his meditation was no mere illusion. Acariya Mun constantly warned his monks to behave in a careful, restrained manner wherever they went, for the devas living in those remote places prefer everything to be orderly and very clean. When terrestrial devas witness such slovenly behavior as a monk sleeping carelessly, lying on his back spread-eagled like a corpse, tossing and mumbling in his sleep like an idiot, they feel quite disgusted, regardless of the fact that it's impossible for a sleeping person to control his actions. Devas often approached Acariya Mun to explain how they felt about this matter. Monks occupy positions of reverence and esteem in the hearts of minds and living beings everywhere, so their deportment should be guarded and restrained at all times, even while sleeping. As far as possible, a monk's appearance should be attractive and pleasing, never disagreeable or offensive. We hate to see monks behaving intemperately, like ordinary lay people showing little concern for the consequences, especially since the circumspection needed to act with restraint is well within their capabilities. It's not our intention to be critical of all monks. Devas everywhere are grateful for the opportunity to pay homage to those monks exhibiting exemplary behavior, because we all appreciate virtue and dearly wish to uphold the sasana. We mention this to you so you can warn your disciples to conduct themselves in a restrained manner that's appealing to human beings and devas alike. Monks who are worthy of respect will cause devas of all realms to feel an even deeper reverence for the sasana. In response to what the devas told him, Acariya Mun always cautioned his disciples to keep all their requisites in a neat, orderly fashion when staying in remote mountainous areas favored by terrestrial devas. Even the foot-wiping rags had to be neatly folded, and not just tossed in a heap. His monks were required to relieve themselves in appropriate places, and latrines were dug only after careful consideration of the surrounding area. Sometimes Acariya Mun explicitly told the monks not to make a latrine under a certain tree or in a certain area, because the devas residing there, or passing through on their way to visit him, would be displeased. Monks who were already well acquainted with the deva world needed no such caution, for they were fully aware of the correct way to behave. Many of Acharya Mun's disciples do possess this capability. However, because their proficiency in such matters is developed in the wilds, they are reluctant to speak about it openly, fearing that learned people everywhere will make fun of them. But within the circle of Gamartana monks, it's easy to determine their identity simply by listening to their discussions about various devas who came to visit them, and the nature of their conversations with these non-physical beings. At the same time, we can get an insight into each monk's level of spiritual attainment.